What's an NSFW fact about history that we don't get to hear too often? In ancient Egypt, soldiers proved their battle prowess by presenting the severed penises of their slaughtered enemies. Traditionally, severed hands were presented, but in 1182 B. Libyans, and other allies invaded Egypt and were defeated by the army of Ramesses III, and Ramesses suspected that some soldiers were claiming extra credit by presenting the hands of women as well as the male soldiers. So he demanded penises instead. His victory inscriptions mention 12,535 foreskins and hands, and has images of the piles of the body parts at the Medinet Habu mortuary temple. Did the number of penis to hands decrease by half? Was it a successful policy change? In 1488 an Italian noblewoman Caterina Sforziario locked herself in a castle to save herself from her enemies. Her enemies managed to capture her children and threatened to kill Jim if she wouldn't surrender. She climbed on ramparts, lifted her skirt to expose her female parts and shouted, "Fools! Don't you see that I can make myself more children?" This particular scene is depicted in the series The Borgias. Her enemies were the children and army of the Pope of Rome, who she would know before because well, he was a Borgia and his vulgarity and orgies didn't leave a very good taste in some true Catholic's mouth. She was later executed in the estate that she had reinforced with the armies of nearby relatives who also hated the Borgias but feared them more, which is what ultimately led to her downfall. Also, she in fact did not have other children after her famous display, which only served to enrage the Pope's son even more than he had already been by her. And yes, Pope Alexander, Borgia, had 4 children with a married courtesan and kept an actual official mistress, which was one of the things that made him so hated, the way he flaunted his sin more than that he was involved with one married woman while having another as his actual official mistress. All the documentaries you see about hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt neatly avoid showing you the fertility rites where the pharaoh's phallus is inseminating the land. There is a lot of semen in Egyptian mythology, people just seem to ignore it. Horus and Set were at each other at all times. Apparently, according to prophecy, Horus would dethrone/kill Set, to the point that they would try to prove their superiority by seeing who could get their semen inside the other. Set, somehow, got to have the butt sex with Horus, but, somehow, Horus dodged the shot at the end. Horus simply jerked off into Set's bowl of salad. Edit, thanks for the cock, guys. King Tut's first wife was his half-sister, but she also may have been his full sister and even at one point may have been his stepmother. If you think that's bad, which it is, look into the Ptolemy family. Tree isn't the right word, more pretzel. Incest was actually encouraged in ancient Egypt, as in many aristocracies, to keep the bloodline pure. Moreover, if there were twins where one was a boy and one was a girl, they were married at birth because it was assumed that they must have banged in the womb. At the Temple of Aphrodite in Cyprus, overlooking the legendary birthplace of Aphrodite, young virgin girls would tie a bowstring around their head and await a man to come along and throw a silver coin of any value into their lap. The man would say, "I demand thee in the name of the goddess." The girl then had to have sex with the man. In this way the girl would make her first fruit offering to Aphrodite. It is said that some girls had to come back for many days before they were chosen. That would play hell with your self-esteem. From the 13th to the 15th of February the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, Roman precursor of Valentine's Day, which was a festival of love and fertility. Priests would sacrifice a goat and then cut the goat skin into pieces. Part of this they would wear on their heads, and other parts were cut into thongs. The men would then run around the city of Rome naked, hitting as many women with these thongs as they possibly could. Being hit would help with pregnancy or becoming pregnant. So depending on what they wanted, the women would either deliberately stand in the way of the men, or try to run away while pretty much everyone was naked. In another part of the festivities, men would draw names of women from a jar and the goal was that they'd stay together for the duration of the festival. This would often result in a lot of, intercourse, and sometimes people actually fell in love and got married after they met during Lupercalia. We really watered that tradition down. Fun fact, in 44 BC, one of the runners was sitting Consul Mark Antony. Read about Captain Cook. He discovered Hawaii. They docked offshore right at harvest time. The natives thought they were fertility gods and sent their women in canoes to the ship. The crew had a blast year after year, until the natives figured out what was happening. Cook ended up having to return, ship was damaged I think, and that caused a bit of ruckus when locals realized he was not Lono. He also tried to kidnap the king of Hawaii, the island, and, well, there is a plaque where he died. Captain Cook is a crazy story. I've been over to the cove where he docked at. There's a huge cliff looking over the cove where most of his bones are stored. Apparently it's a sacred place, and they used to send kids up there to find a secretive spot to place the bones. Afterwards they would have to kill themselves. Pretty heavy stuff lol. A lot of people banged in the White House on the day of Andrew Jackson's inauguration. It was just a regular house before then. Why? Mozart wrote a piece called Lick My Ass. I hear that Lick My Love Pump was written as a continuation of it. Mozart probably wasn't talking about rim jobs though. In German, Leck my Arsch means kiss my ass, though it's literally translated lick my ass, but it's a very common phrase in German even today. Pope Alexander VI might have held orgies where he kept track of men's orgasms while he held the position of Pope, and also definitely had an infidelity fetish, especially with women whose wedding he'd officiated. He had 4 kids with one married noblewoman, and at least another 3 to 5 outside of that. Well, before he was Pope, he was Rodrigo Borgia. There are certain things you expect from that family, exaggerated reputation or no. So very pious. During wartime some armies would wipe shit on their spears so that when they stabbed slashed enemies they'd get that extra poison damage. In medieval times, they would sling dead animals via catapult to spread disease, which was devastating in those times due to lack of proper medicine. It seems biological warfare was the world's actual first weapon of mass destruction. The dildo was created almost 1,500 years before the wheel. Priorities. A wheel is pretty specific, whereas anything can be a dildo. In 1511 a bunch of people in Brussels took part in the building of 110 vulgar snowmen as an act of protest. It's known as the Miracle of 1511 if you want to know more. Most Belgian thing ever. Calvin would be proud. Romans loved depicting sexual acts. On many everyday items, like oil lamps, combs, bowls, etc. you often see images of people fucking. Like porn but in daily life. So when Pompeii was first uncovered and the archaeologists were making their maps, Pompeii's our best guess for what an ancient Roman city looks like, as it and many of its inhabitants were captured in time. They decided that any buildings with dicks in front of them had to be brothels. Then they realized that if that was true, 90% of the buildings in Pompeii were brothels. The revised map found only a single brothel, differentiated from the phallically decorated dwellings, by the presence of mosaics that served as a menu. Witches were more often mutilated than actually burned. Fun fact, none of the witches at Salem were burned at the stake. All were hanged and one man was crushed with stones. Were they trying to find spare lumber to build a bridge? The deadliest female serial killer in US history had murdered 35 people with an axe by the time she was 18 years old. Dear Diary, my teen angst bullshit now has a body count. Name? In ancient Egypt they held a fertility festival each year, and at this festival it was the pharaoh's responsibility to strip down and jerk off into the Nile. Edit, should also mention that once the pharaoh had finished, men in the crowd were encouraged to step forward and join in. So once a year the Nile River literally tuned into a massive public circle jerk. According to their mythology, the Nile was created when one of the gods jerked off. It's a river of God smooch. Good luck, Cleo. You know that one psychologist guy, Freud? Well, one time he was tasked with finding the testicles of an eel, so he got literally hundreds of eels so he could find their balls. Nowadays we know eels have retractable testicles, but Freud didn't know that, so he cut up hundreds of eels looking for their testicles. They're all women. Get me more eels. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.